Okay, so now we have this 7.5 inch front differential. I showed you how to remove the extension housing. Got the extension housing off with the ADD actuator. We opened up the clamshell, 7.5 inch front diff case, got that open. Pulled out the carrier assembly with the ring gear and the open front differential, and we're going to be getting rid of this because remember we're putting in an ARB locker, so we're not going to be really utilizing any of this stuff because it doesn't have any shims behind the bearings on this side. They're on the outside of the case. Shims are located here, like I mentioned in my previous video. So the next step is to take off the pinion flange. So we have the pinion gear that's inside here on the case. Right there is where it's at. So we're going to take off that nut. So we're going to first take a punch and then punch up this lock nut to get it to seat up so we're not locked onto the shaft anymore. Okay, that guy's pulled up. Next up, this is either a 24mm socket or a 15/16 socket. And we should just be able to put an impact on it. Be able to, there we go. So we got the nut off for the pinion. Gonna try, oh, we pulled it off by hand. Typically, it requires a 3-jaw puller to pull these guys off. So if you have a 3-ton jaw puller or a 5-ton 3-jaw puller, that's usually how you remove those guys to take it off. This one though is loose enough that it came right off, which is usually pretty common for the 7.5 inch front diff. Next up, I'm going to take this thing over to the press. Well, technically, we're going to be getting rid of these gears and the bearings, so we can just try to hammer this out real quick. Because typically what you want to do is take this assembly. If you were wanting to reuse your gears or your bearings inside here, you have a bearing race. Now this thing right here is a very smooth surface, so you got to be super clean, extra cleanliness when going on when you're rebuilding these diffs. If you're reusing bearings, you never want to hammer anything that has to do with putting pressure against a bearing. So when the bearing is sitting up there and say you hammer a bearing into it, all those little bearings, the roller bearings, so basically this thing right here has the roller bearings, tapered roller bearings to be exact. You hit them with a hammer, it's going to indent inside this bearing race. It's going to leave little depressions inside there. So that basically is ruining a bearing race. So you never hammer on anything you plan on reusing. But since we're not reusing this pinion because we're upgrading to 488 gears, this is a 410 gear ratio setup, and we're not reusing this stuff. We're going to be putting in all new bearings inside this whole assembly, so we don't really need to worry about damaging that stuff, and it's usually can be pretty easy. Bam! There she blows, Captain. All right. So right there, we got the crush sleeve. Crush sleeve is out. Excuse the messiness, we just got a lot of grease in here and we're gonna be cleaning all this out. So when this is all said and done, there's not gonna be a drop of grease or dirt or anything inside here. It's gonna be perfectly clean. But for right now, during the disassembly, it's a little messy. So there's a crush sleeve. When we're going in, if say like you're using a solid pinion spacer, this has a certain diameter that this has been crushed. So this basically will sit right here over the pinion. Goes like that, and it separates between the other bearing, the outer pinion bearing, and it keeps the tension on those things from being able to push in on each other. Now, this is a one-time use item. So when you are putting a new diff back together, you get a new crush sleeve, and you want to set your preload to crush it down and everything like that, and you only get one shot at it. If you set it too high, you pretty much just trash the crush sleeve and you got to start over. If you're using a solid pinion spacer, which I do recommend using a solid pinion spacer, it's a good idea to take a measurement of how big this is with your micrometer, see how high it is, and then when you set up your solid pinion spacer, take your solid pinion spacer and then add in those shims. Basically, you got your pinion spacer shims that look like so. You're going to be adding those up, and then you want it to be about equal to what this is as your starting point. And then you assemble your new pinion gear with a new pinion spacer on there, and take your measurements of preload and everything like that. You get your preload set when you're all ready to go, And then you can start continuing on with the other measurements: pinion depth, gear contact pattern, preload, backlash, all that stuff. So we got that out. Next thing up, we're gonna get this thing on our mount. We're gonna move some stuff around here. Get some impact guns out of the way. I like to mount my differentials onto this basically differential holding fixture. Well, technically this is a transmission holding fixture, but I only use them for differentials. So it's pretty nice though, because you can be able to orientate the differential however you need to do it. So we're going to take 2 of these clamshell housing bolts, and I'm going to open up these jaws, which I can't remember the size. Oops, 19, there we go. There we go. Okay, we got those all mobile, and we kind of want to index this thing. Well, let me put my oil catch underneath here, so I'm not making a mess of gear oil all over the place. So I usually will put this thing on the mounting fixture and then start cleaning it up, pre-clean with like a wire brush and other things, and brake clean to get the big bulky stuff off. Basically, I want this thing set up in a manner so that I have access to the pinion, because we want to be able to hammer out the pinion bearings. I'll show you how we do that here in a second. We're not pinion bearings per se, it's just the pinion bearing races, what I meant to say. So we're going to hold this up in a location where we should have a good mounting point. Grab my 14mm socket or wrench here. We're just going to gently tie this guy down. Kind of want to center it just a wee bit. Okay, we get those. And now we start cranking on this guy. Get that guy tight. This one tight. And go back to these other ones just to make sure they're tight enough to hold it, because I don't want anything moving really, because then it kind of defeats the purpose of the mount in the first place. We'll get rid of these greasy old rags. Lay down some fresh clean ones. Gonna put those guys here. Okay. I'm gonna sip my coffee. There we go. I'm just gonna kind of move everything down so we have room to work. Okay. Oh, and when you're doing disassembling, if you're not familiar with how everything goes, it's a really good idea to keep track of the order everything comes out at, because that just makes things better all around. So we're going to turn the housing now, get this thing orientated straight up. So we still have our pinion bearing, the outer pinion bearing, and the washer inside here, basically the oil slinger inside there, and we need to get that guy out. So being careful not to scratch the housing, we're going to use a pry bar and get that seal out of there. Yep, didn't touch the housing. Okay, so now we have our oil slinger and our outer pinion bearing. So there's those guys right there. Now all that's left is the bearing races inside the housing. So we're going to be putting in all new bearings inside here, and plus I want to clean up this housing, so I'm going to go ahead and just remove these guys. So to remove the outer one, typically on a third member, Toyota third member, they are super easy to remove all the bearings inside this thing. You can just use a brass punch, which I usually use a brass punch so you don't damage anything, but use a brass punch and hammer out the bearing races. But on a clamshell, not so easy. You gotta got a few other methods. So, my method of choice is going back to the slide hammer. This time we're going to use 2 jaw teeth right there, some of the bolts for it. And we'll pull this guy out. First, we need a cone washer, because this cone right here allows us to have tension pushing outwards on our outer pinion bearing race. Next up, we'll install this piece, which holds the claws. That's way too close. Okay, so we're gonna be pointing outward. So I grab these things in the outer direction. Go just like so. That one, put it in there. All right. So now, we're going to take down our cone, which is going to put tension on these little fingers to kind of keep them spread outwards. I'm just going to get it in position for when we actually start putting tension on these guys. Okay, we'll stick it inside here. Gonna flare out the arms until we got enough grip. Oh, grab them below the race. There we go. That's the actual race in there. Oh, getting a little loose there. Tighten these guys back up. Bam! There it is. We just removed the outer bearing race from the differential housing. Okay, all done with the tool. I like to put my tools away when I'm done. I don't think I'll need this guy anymore. So, go. Bear with me here. A little tedious to get these guys going. This stuff is in there. Bam! There we go. Oh, I forgot the little umbrella or conical shaped attachment. Okay, so pinion bearings out, outer pinion bearing washers out. Actually look at this guy. Looks like our differential is holding up pretty good beforehand. You usually can inspect bearings just by inspecting the pitting and everything that's on side here and checking out the wear pattern, if it's oval shaped or whatever. And it looks like everything's been super centered. No major problems with the differential, which is great. Air compressor kicked on. Okay, now we're going to remove the inner pinion bearing race. All right, got the air compressor shut off, so now I can hear again. So, inner pinion bearing race is out. Checking this guy out. Looks pretty clean. Doesn't look like any signs of excessive damage or anything on here, so that looks pretty good. I mean, we're not going to be reusing that, but we will be reusing these for the assembly of the new bearing races. These are perfect tools because the new bearing races, the outer diameter is practically the exact same size that we want to be able to hammer things in or press them in, however we're going to do it. So yeah, got the housing here. We're going to take a little bit of brake clean and a rag. Just kind of get some of this grease out of here because it's an oily one, that's for sure. And then we'll get this thing off the mount and I'll show you how to measure and locate our shims. Okay, now that we got that somewhat clean, I'm gonna leave that housing right there. Oh, we gotta get out that axle seal, so we can just use a pry bar. Careful not to gouge the housing. Get that guy out of there, perfect. No problemo. Easy peasy. Just clean that up a little bit. We have access to our shim that's right there. Okay, so we're going to take our outer housing. This is basically the passenger side clamshell housing that we removed in video number 1. So we basically, what we want to do here is we don't want to reuse this race. So just like these bearing races that we got out there, we need to get at the one that's out here. So pretty easy method on how to do this. Actually, it's got the dowel pin still in there, which I want to knock out real quick. We're going to knock out the dowel. Perfect, don't lose that. We'll want it later. Okay, so the dowel pin's out. So now we can just lay this thing flat on its face. And then we're going to take, let's see here. So a bearing race removal tool works, I think, the best in this case. Well, it works pretty darn good. You see, the thing is with differential rebuilds, it's all about kind of how the method and the tools that you have at hand and what's best to use. So the trick is just to deform or bend or pinch or damage the shims at all. So you want to take extra care on safely removing them and installing them. And ideally, we want to try to reuse as much of these shims as possible because doing a thin shim stack can be kind of a pain if you have to make a bunch of adjustments, but if you can just use the factory one and reuse it over again, it's ideal. Trust me, in the long run, it's way better to just try to reuse the original shim, so try not to damage these guys going out of here. So, okay, nice and easy. Okay, there's the housing, we got the shim, and we got the bearing race. Okay. So now that we got the shim out of here, we're going to clean this guy up just a little bit. And what we're going to want to do is, number 1, we don't want to lose track of where this shim came out of, because this one goes, I like to identify these on which side of the differential they go. The way that I mark them is ring side or pinion side. So basically, it's usually whichever side faces a certain gear. So in the clamshell housing, when the differential goes inside, the ring gear is going to be furthest away from that bearing or from that shim. On this one, this side right here is going to be the closest to the ring gear. So the ring gear is right here. And actually, when the housing is together, this part goes like this. It houses right over just like that. So this side of the case is closest to the ring gear. So this is the ring gear shim. So I marked that with ring gear or an R. However you want to do it, just make sure you mark it. That's my way of marking them so I know. And then on the other side, the other shim is closest to the pinion, which is this guy. So the other shim that I use, I call the pinion shim. So there's a lot of differentials, you know, you're gonna have your ring gear right here, and then your pinion gear is gonna be right there. So you're gonna have ring gear side and then pinion side. So we have a shim that's gonna be ring gear side, pinion side. Okay. So get this dirty bastard out of here. All right, using a lot of towels, but it's okay. Usually I wear gloves, but sometimes I don't like wearing gloves because those things can get a little sweaty and other things like that, and I don't like it. So I'll usually though use gloves during the assembly because I'm actually afraid of any dirt or contaminants that get stuck to my fingers, or the oils on my fingers can contaminate my surfaces. And I don't know, call me a little OCD about it, but you know, I kind of take a lot of care in making sure everything is as clean as possible when I'm doing my final assembly. So there's that shim. We are going to get out a micrometer now. Okay. We're going to use a 0 to 1 micrometer. First off, we're going to ensure that it's calibrated. Okay, and it looks like we are calibrated. Perfect. Do a couple test runs. The whole trick with your measurement device, you just want to be able to duplicate the same measurement over and over and over again. So we're going to take this ring gear shim. We're going to give this a measurement. The whole thing when it comes to using micrometers like this, or a caliper is how you want to call it, it's really a trick to measuring things, because if it's really it takes skill. You just can't just put a micrometer on something, crank it down, like, all right, let's check it out. You actually kind of have to have a good touch. You don't want to crank it down too much. Some of them have an automatic clicker. This one used to have an automatic clicker, but I kind of disabled it because I just like the feel of it better. Because when you measure things, I mean, I've had to measure thousands of shims, so I've kind of developed the feel for it. So we're going to go over here. Okay, so we are almost 0.1 inches thick. We're just shy by actually 1/10. So let's see here. So we got let me get a sheet of paper because I like to write this stuff down. Okay, sheet of paper, fresh page, pen right here. Okay, so we got, it was I know, yeah, we're gonna do ring shim. Okay. So we got 0.9. 0.98. Oh wait, no, sorry. That's 0.098. See, that's how you can get messed up so quickly. 0.098. I'm not counting my numbers correctly. 0.098. Then we're going for the fourth number here, which is critical. Make sure we get this back to where we were. Okay, 0.989. Right there, so that is 0.0989 inches thick. So then I take my Sharpie. We're just gonna write on here an R for ring gear shim. Then we're gonna do 0.0989. Okay, so now that we have marked that, we keep that to the side. We don't need that shim anymore. Well, we need it still, don't throw it away. We just don't need it right now. Okay, next up, we need to get out the shim that's inside the clamshell case on this side. So first things first, oh wait, I'm gonna actually remove the dowel that's on this side if I can, because I don't like the dowel in there. We're gonna try taking some channel locks and gently give this guy a little bit of a twist. There we go. Try not to mar this guy up. If you do, you can just put it onto a grinding wheel. Okay, so we got all those alignment dowels out of there. Okay, so there's our shim right there, but I don't want to hit it while it's on this thing because it just shoots everywhere. So we're going to remove clamshell housing right here. Just roll these guys up. Cooperate. Okay. Now we got our housing out. Put my block of wood underneath here. Wood block is always a lifesaver when you're working on these things. Definitely suggest having some wood blocks around to kind of balance things out. So there's our pinion shim. We're gonna get our pinion shim out of here. Okay, there we go. We're gonna put this case to the side. Right now we don't need to mount it back up because next time I'm having that thing out, I'm gonna be drilling some holes in some stuff. So, okay, so this is our pinion shim. It's the closest to the pinion, so it's classified as our pinion shim here. There we go. All right. Clean up that bearing race. Put this off to the side because, like I said before, we're going to be utilizing these guys as tools, installation tools in the future. Always hold on to bearing races. These are super universal in the automotive industry. One of the top 10 best tools you can hang on to, period. Okay, micrometer, where did it go? It's over here. Okay, we're gonna put this guy right here. We're gonna give a measurement on this guy. All right. So, we got 75. Get out our piece of paper here. Do a little bit of counting. So we're gonna do pinion, shim, and we are 0.08, 0.08, 4, 0.084, get our fourth digit, 848. Okay, so ring gear shim, 0.0989 inches. Pinion shim, 0.048 inches thick. So those two shims, those things together, that's going to be our baseline of where we want to start when we are reassembling our differential. Since we're going to be putting in the ARB locker, that is going to help us as a baseline on where we want to start. So we're going to put that shim off to the side. So that's basically how you tear all that stuff apart. The next thing we're going to do is do the ring gear removal, because there is actually a shim right beneath here that's going to be removing outside of, that's basically for your pinion depth. Pinion depth is basically how deep or how shallow your pinion is inside the case, which relates to how close it is to the ring gear. So this pinion shim right there that we need to get out, and we need to measure that guy because we want to use that in our new differential. So trying to reuse as much as we can, and I'll show you how to do the removal process in the next video. Thank you very much.